Hello, this is Angela with Permaculture. Long time no see. I know it's been several days since I've made a video. Life has just been extremely hectic. I have a huge backlog of footage and also notes for many videos on my phone, and I just have not had the time to get to them. I actually probably should be working on those instead of making a fresh separate video, but something came up on my Facebook page and I wanted to address it really quickly. I obviously am doing this spur of the moment. You can hear Ruth is over here. Say hi, Ruth. Working on one of her papers for college class. So there will be like keyboard clicking in the background. This is just when I have time to film. So I'm actually like still in my jammies. I'm wearing my Commend-a-Kit sweatshirt and flannel PJs and YOLO, let's do this. This over here. Okay, so yesterday I made a post on social media that, I didn't think was that controversial, and it got picked up by some big pages, and there's been a lot of engagement, and I thought it's really worth having a discussion. Sometimes social media can be a really toxic place where people cannot, use good intent, engage in bad faith, and have kind of like faux outrage or performative outrage, right? But sometimes there's really good conversations and things that we can glean, little bits of information that can help us move toward resilience. So for me, I can get frustrated, I can get spicy with engagement online, but I also know that there's lots of good content there, and I see the comments that people leave, the really thoughtful conversations that folks have, the really good advice people give. And for me, like doing social media still feels like a win most of the time, even though it can be really frustrating sometimes. So I made this post. It says, normalize seasonal eating. We don't need strawberries and tomatoes in November. We've got persimmons and apples in abundance. That got shared a lot. And a lot of people commented. Some of them were like, absolutely. And some of them, I think, really misunderstood the post, willfully or perhaps not. And I thought it's worth talking about this concept for a minute. Seasonal eating. I've talked about it a lot in the past because for me, part of the plan for my permaculture garden is to have this long harvest season where I start harvesting the first fruits out of my garden really early in the year, as early as I can, March, April, and go all the way into December and end with medlars, right? I'm having this huge long harvest season, and that's just for fruits. Because for me, seasonal eating is really important. When we harvest food, when it is optimally ripe and locally grown, we are picking food at the peak of its flavor, the peak of its nutrition. When those fruits have evolved to be harvested is when they have the most sweetness, the most flavor, because those plants want us or whatever other animals to disperse their seeds, right? So they want the fruit to be really enticing and packed with all the good things that will encourage a bird or a mammal to eat the fruit and then disperse the seeds for them, right? Fruit is meant in particular to be harvested at a point when it has optimal flavor and nutrition. And that means when it is in the right season. Now, I made that post because I was thinking particularly about, like restaurants or grocery stores serving those really pithy, like pale, flavorless tomatoes in the winter. Or those strawberries that are like white in the middle and taste like cardboard, a really pale facsimile of what a strawberry picked in June tastes like. And how those things are marketed to us even in this season. This concept of eating seasonally has been lost to us. It was something that we understood intrinsically. We had no choice but to eat seasonally all the way until the mid to late 20th century. And now we're looking at grapes flown in February from South America. We're looking at strawberries shipped in from Central America, or even sometimes like from New Zealand to Oregon here. We're looking at tomatoes that are picked incredibly underripe and picked for, the variety is picked and selected for its transportability, its durability, and being shipped long distances, not its flavor and nutrition. So what we're getting is a pale, less than inferior copy of what real food should taste like and what real food should nourish us with, right? And we've lost that concept of seasonal eating, that there is value in enjoying things only in their season and doing without until they come back into season again. Barbara Kingsolver talks a lot about this in her book, Animal Vegetable Miracle, which is our family's probably favorite book. We've listened to it a gazillion times on audiobook, and I highly recommend it. And I realize in a Facebook post that I have to keep to so many short words, I cannot fully encompass all of my thoughts about seasonal eating. So people came back and were like, not everybody has the option to eat fresh fruit. Well, I'm not talking about neglecting our ability to preserve food, right? I'm talking about when you pick something when it's in peak season and then preserve it, you can enjoy it later in the year. I'm not saying you can only eat what you can glean from your garden in any given month and eat it fresh, right? Nowhere did I make that assertion. My freezer is packed full of things from the garden: shredded summer squash, roasted winter squash, berries, chopped, blanched kale. I have dehydrated food. I have mushrooms. I have figs. I have prunes from my garden, all dehydrated. I have canned produce as well. I have pickled produce as well. So this whole idea that, I'm not saying seasonal eating means that you only eat what is fresh and ripe right now. It means that you pick something when it is in season, when it is growing and harvestable in your garden, and you eat it then, or you preserve it for later. A big part of this is this eating locally. When we're looking at foods shipped in from South America, shipped in from New Zealand, the carbon footprint is enormous. And often those foods are grown where the kinds of pesticides and herbicides and fungicides they're allowed to use are maybe not legal where we are and have health risks for us, where the environmental consequences are heavier, where the cost to those communities of growing the food, the cost to the laborers of having to produce that food so that we in America can eat what we want when we want it, is very heavy, and we are not seeing the full cost of that. We're not absorbing the full cost of that, and we're certainly not absorbing the flavor and nutrition we should deserve from that fruit, right? So all I'm saying in this post is there's value in seasonal eating. Normalize seasonal eating. What have we lost as a society by saying, I have the right to eat asparagus with my Thanksgiving dinner? Y'all, if you're eating asparagus at Thanksgiving, you're getting it from South America. It doesn't grow in North America until the early spring. I'm picking asparagus in February and March in my garden. And so when we eat things in their season, we are, a couple of things here. Let me run through the list. We are getting the full flavor and nutrition from that food. We're getting food that is picked when it is at peak ripeness, not when it is most durable for shipping, right? Often when food is at its peak ripeness, it's ripe for a narrow window and it's more fragile. And so when we pick food that is underripe or food that is developed, bred for its shippability, not its flavor, we lose a lot of nutrition and flavor out of our food. Thanks for the grumbly tummy, Martha. Number 2, we have a much higher carbon footprint and a much higher cost to the environment and to workers when we are looking at food being shipped long distances. We are putting those costs off on other people and future generations and other people in other places, and we're putting that cost off onto the planet. And we're losing the benefits of seasonal eating in terms of our experience of food, in terms of our enjoyment of food. When I decide not to eat those bland, flavorless, poor quality texture tomatoes in the winter, and I wait all the way until next August to have a fresh tomato, I am learning to do without, and learning that in doing so, I build up the anticipation and the enjoyment of those fresh foods so much more. The experience of that tomato is so heightened for me because I have been without it for months and months, right? It also allows us to kind of run the course of our enjoyment of food, right? By the time I've hit the end of September, beginning of October, I'm tired of fresh tomatoes. I've been eating them nonstop. And I allow my palate to transition to something else. I allow myself to enjoy a different food when it's in its season. And I allow myself to create a cycle of the way that I participate in eating, of the way that I enjoy my food. That cycle of longing, building anticipation, those first harvests out of the garden and the sheer level of enjoyment, the like coming into peak abundance where I can eat as much as I want of that particular food, the waning enjoyment as I've kind of overdone it for the season, and then the end of the season that gives me a natural rest, a natural break where I can learn to enjoy other foods that I've been without for months and months and months. That benefit to us in our experience of eating is lost when we no longer eat seasonally. So, I think some folks really missed the point of what I was saying like, this seems like it's conditioning people to accept less and less instead of being grateful that we have access to these things year round. To which my reply was, it's not even remotely doing that. Also, different is not less. I would argue that in order for you to have more, you are doing so by causing other people to have less. It's a very modern notion of, I want what I want when I want it. It's unsustainable and exploitive. What are the hidden costs of having access to whatever food you want whenever you want it? How far was that food shipped? What is the carbon footprint of that food? What is the quality of that food? And what conditions did those workers have to labor under? Someone else commented, which I think is a great comment. I agree, it depends on what is seasonal eating in your area means. Right now in Florida, we're getting tomatoes and strawberries growing because it's too hot in the summer to grow those. Yes, one of the things I talk about so much on this channel is culturally and climate appropriate food, right? So if you live somewhere where different foods are ripe at different times, you are eating seasonally and locally out of the abundance of what is fresh and at peak nutrition where you are, right? So that's kind of the point. Like, you in Florida in the winter, and when my parents lived in Florida and the girls were little, we would travel there. We would go strawberry picking in January because that's when strawberries were ripe and really fresh and wonderful. Like, as good as a June strawberry in Oregon is a January strawberry in Florida. But in order to enjoy strawberries in January in Oregon, they have to be picked when they are massively underripe. They are varieties developed, again, for shippability, not flavor. And there is a huge carbon footprint to moving those from Central America / Florida all the way up to Oregon in January. Why not just eat something that is more flavorful, more nutritious, and local, and has a lower environmental cost in January? Said some of us don't have access to some of those things though and have to settle for what local rural stores carry. Absolutely. We lived in rural Oregon and our grocery store was tiny and we had a very limited selection of what we could eat. And I think that speaks to what I'm always criticizing on this channel, which is the systems that we have to operate in, not individuals. If the system has denied you the ability to access what you deserve to access, there's no judgment on you. That's just more evidence that we need to reform the systems. And part of doing that is raising the awareness of what the systems used to look like before they were like what they are now, where we embrace seasonal eating. I think that can do a lot to shift our diet, shift the way we cook. That also can encourage local grocers and local food systems to stock what is seasonally available. There's a lot of cooking noise. Everybody's cooking in the kitchen. We have a small house, y'all. Someone said, here in Sweden, we import tomatoes, lettuce, cucumber, etc. from Spain all winter long. Around New Year's, there are signs at the stores that say asparagus season. It's asparagus season in Peru. It's absolute madness. Exactly. This is what I'm talking about. What have we lost by this idea of we can eat whatever we want any season of the year? And again, Barbara Kingsolver talks about this a lot. I'll just keep plugging Animal Vegetable Miracle till the end of time because I love that book. Someone said, so potatoes, venison, rabbit, and kale, and very little else. And my reply was, no, not true. There's a huge diversity of food for us up here in the Northern Hemisphere, up in the top of the Northern Hemisphere, that we can eat in the winter months, including food that we have preserved from the summer months. But also pumpkins, apples, pears, cabbage, rutabagas, beets, nuts, all kinds of game, livestock, citrus, quince, medlar, dried fruit, cranberries, mushrooms. The list goes on and on and on and on. There's not a small range of foods we can eat in the winter. In fact, for us, for our family, in the winter is kind of like a boon because of all of these foods we've preserved in the summer and all of the foods we've harvested in late autumn and then winter foods as well. Okay, so my last reply is to this person who I think this is very telling for me as like a Zennial, elder, millennial, Gen Xer. I don't know. I'm like in that gap. I started doing TikTok and I did it for a couple of weeks and I had to quit because it's probably the most toxic platform I have ever been on. And I've never been on Reddit or Tumblr. So maybe those are worse, but
worse than Tumblr.
It's worse than Tumblr.
Not worse than Reddit, it was worse than Tumblr.
Okay. Ruth says that TikTok is worse than Tumblr. The discourse there absolutely lacks nuance. It's a lot of performative outrage. It's a lot of getting extremely upset at, what would you call that, Ruth?
That's the bean soup reaction.
Yeah, so it's called the bean soup, like, problem or reaction or whatever. When there was this TikTok that went really viral where someone was like, oh, I'm making this bean soup. And the comments were like, okay, well, that's great, but not everybody can eat beans. Or like, okay, well, that's great, but like, I'm on the keto diet and I can't eat beans. Or like, well, what if there aren't beans available at my grocery store? Like, just these really, okay, well, then you're not making bean soup. Like, or you're missing the entire point of what the post was originally about. Just this kind of like, I'm going to pinpoint some tiny, tiny thing in your argument, or I'm going to willfully misunderstand your argument, or I'm going to find some way that I can be like, well, actually, and how unhelpful that is to the discourse and conversation, how utterly lacking discourse in TikTok is. This comment that I'm going to read you is like that. And I think it's very much kind of a Gen Z thing. Not that millennials and Gen Xers and boomers don't reply that way. I just see it really heavily coming out of younger folks. And I would say my Gen Z kids would agree with me. Would you agree with me, Ruth?
Gen Z and millennials.
Gen Z and millennials. Okay. Maybe it's because I'm like, okay, whatever. So this person says, normalize letting people enjoy what they want and not being so condescending. Not everyone has equal access to fresh fruit. Okay, so could we just read positive intent into other people's words? Could we understand that someone, especially somebody on a permaculture page, while I can get spicy, somebody on a permaculture page is striving to create a world with earth care, people care, and fair share. And so, you know, actually like equal access to abundant living is something that I'm all about. And so, yes, you're right. Not everyone has equal access to fresh fruit all the time. That's not the point that I was even making. So my reply, you know, it's okay to assume positive intent instead of coming in with faux misplaced outrage. No one here was condescending. I get that the internet reinforces this kind of reactionary engagement that utterly lacks nuance and is inherently oppositional, and that's unfortunate. That's why I quit TikTok. Obviously, not everyone has equal access to fresh fruit. I never said that everybody did. As someone who has experienced food insecurity for many years, believe me, I'm highly aware of the problems in our food system, and my post was speaking to one of those problems. I think you're willfully missing the entire point of what I'm saying. We have a capitalist food system that reinforces the mindset of I want what I want when I want it. It discourages us from thinking about the consequences of that mindset, how we are exploiting laborers and the environment. I went on from there. You can go read the comment if you want. I think when we are engaging around these topics, there is the greater issue of internet discourse lacking nuance. There is the greater issue of performative combativeness and opposition being something that really hinders good conversation. There were lots of folks with really lovely and encouraging and thoughtful things to say in this comment thread, so I don't want to make it sound like there weren't. But I also want to make it clear that, like, in this post where I'm talking about seasonal eating, let's take a permaculture approach. What are we talking about? What is seasonal eating? How can we like fully kind of flesh that out? What are the negative consequences of not engaging in seasonal eating? What are the positive consequences of engaging in it? What would it look like to create a resilient society where we had food systems that honored the cycle of the seasons, that honored seasonal eating? How would that change the way that we live? How would it increase our abundance? How would it increase our enjoyment and quality of life, right? So I'll leave it with those questions. I have so much to catch up on, y'all, and I appreciate you being patient. I hope to get caught up soon. I hope that you are staying well and safe. Thank you to the folks who continue to support me on Patreon, despite the fact that I have gone basically 2 weeks without making a video, and I normally put out 3 to 5 videos a week. Thank you for continuing to support me and understand that like there's an ebb and flow. There's a seasonality to things in life. I am going to go help my kids. I've got some things I've got to go take care of, so I'm going to say goodbye for now. Please don't forget to click like and subscribe, and I'll be back real soon. Bye-bye.